The moment Tiana Taylor finally broke her silence, the narrative didn't just crack, it collapsed. No vague captions. No cryptic lyrics. Just a raw truth that redefined everything fans thought they knew about her quiet exit from Pierre. Because according to Tiana, this wasn't about growing apart. It wasn't about timing. And it definitely wasn't mutual. It was betrayal, the kind that doesn't explode loudly, but poisons trust so completely that leaving becomes the only option. Insiders say the reveal landed like a gut punch, because it reframed months of speculation in seconds. What looked like privacy now feels like protection. What felt like grace now reads like restraint. Tiana wasn't silent, because she was healing. She was silent, because speaking sooner would have exposed a truth she wasn't ready to weaponize. Until now. According to those close to her, the betrayal wasn't public-facing. It happened behind closed doors, in moments where loyalty was assumed and discretion was expected. And when that expectation was violated, the relationship didn't unravel, it ended. Clean. Immediate. Non-negotiable. That's what shocked people most. No back and forth. No reconciliation arc. Just a decision. Fans immediately started replaying old interviews, old photos, old energy. The dots began connecting themselves. The imbalance. The distance. The way Tiana carried emotional weight, while Aaron's silence earned sympathy. Suddenly, that silence didn't look noble, it looked convenient. And here's the part that changed everything. Tiana didn't expose him to punish him. She exposed the reason she walked away, because staying would have meant betraying herself. This wasn't a breakup story. It was a boundary story. And once you hear what she says next, there's no going back to the version you believed before. From the moment Tiana Taylor finally decided to speak in her own voice, the story stopped being speculative and started becoming personal. According to her account, this wasn't a situation where love slowly faded or two people quietly outgrew each other. It was a rupture, one that happened the instant trust was compromised in a way she could not ignore or rationalize away. Tiana has been careful in how she frames it. She doesn't describe the betrayal as scandalous or explosive in the way gossip culture expects. There were no public embarrassments. No tabloid photos. No dramatic confrontations played out online. And that's exactly why it cut so deeply. According to her, the betrayal happened in the private space where loyalty is assumed, the space where you believe the person beside you is protecting you, not positioning themselves at your expense. Insiders close to Tiana say the issue wasn't infidelity in the traditional sense, nor was it a single moment of dishonesty. It was misalignment paired with secrecy. A realization that Pierre was moving in ways that benefited him while leaving her exposed, emotionally, narratively, and reputationally. That realization, sources say, landed all at once, and when it did, there was no room left for negotiation. What shocked fans most is how quickly Tiana chose herself. There was no attempt to explain it away. No effort to salvage appearances. According to those close to her, once she understood what was happening, she understood something else, just as clearly. Staying would require her to accept a version of the relationship that asked her to carry the cost of someone else's choices. And that was a line she refused to cross. Tiana has hinted that the betrayal wasn't about cruelty, it was about convenience. About how easy it was for Aaron to benefit from her presence, her discretion, and her emotional openness while maintaining a posture of distance that shielded him from scrutiny. That imbalance, she suggests, is what ultimately broke the relationship. Not because it was malicious, but because it was unsustainable. Looking back, fans are beginning to see what she means. Tiana was the one whose life and decisions were dissected. She was the one expected to explain, to reassure, to absorb speculation. Aaron's silence, by contrast, was interpreted as dignity, privacy, maturity. And for a long time, Tiana allowed that interpretation to stand, even when it cost her. According to insiders, that's where the betrayal truly lived. It wasn't in what Aaron did so much as in what he allowed to happen. He allowed a narrative to form where her decisiveness looked impulsive and his distance looked virtuous. He allowed her to be misunderstood while benefiting from the misunderstanding. And once Tiana recognized that pattern, she couldn't unsee it. She has spoken about the moment clarity arrived, not as an argument, but as a quiet realization. A recognition that the relationship no longer felt mutual in responsibility. She wasn't just sharing space with someone, she was buffering consequences they didn't have to face. And love, she says, should never require that kind of self-erasure. What makes this revelation so unsettling is how restrained it is. Tiana isn't naming names beyond her own experience. She isn't assigning villainy. She isn't detailing private conversations. She's simply explaining why she left, because staying would have meant betraying her own values around loyalty, transparency, and reciprocity. According to people close to her, the decision was immediate once that line was crossed. There was no dramatic fallout. No emotional bargaining. She stepped back, recalibrated, and chose distance. That choice, insiders say, wasn't cold, it was protective. Fans who followed the relationship now see the signs they missed. The lack of shared narrative. The absence of mutual framing. The way Tiana's emotional presence was visible while Aaron's remained undefined. At the time, it was called privacy. Now, it feels like asymmetry. Tiana's account reframes the entire relationship not as a failure of love, but as a failure of alignment. She entered with openness and assumed reciprocity. He entered with caution and preserved flexibility. Neither approach is inherently wrong, but when they collide without honesty, someone always pays the price. And according to Tiana, she was done paying it. What stands out most in this first phase of her story is the absence of bitterness. She doesn't speak like someone seeking revenge. She speaks like someone setting the record straight for herself. The truth, as she tells it, isn't meant to destroy Aaron's image, it's meant to explain her exit. That distinction matters. Because in a culture that demands spectacle, Tiana is offering context instead. She's saying, I didn't leave because I stopped caring. I left because I cared enough about myself to refuse a dynamic that asked me to be silent while carrying the weight. As this chapter of her story opens, one thing becomes clear. This wasn't a breakup driven by drama. It was a boundary enforced by clarity. And once clarity arrives, there's no version of love that can survive at the expense of self-respect. The most shocking part of what Tiana revealed isn't what Aaron allegedly did. It's how quickly she realized she deserved better, and how decisively she acted on that truth. As Tiana Taylor's explanation continued to unfold, the second phase shifted the focus from what happened to what it revealed about power inside the relationship. This was where the story stopped being emotional and became structural. According to Tiana's perspective, the betrayal wasn't a single act. It was the realization that the relationship had been operating on uneven ground long before it ended. What she describes isn't a dramatic moment you could point to on a timeline. It was a slow accumulation of imbalance. She has suggested that she began noticing how often she was the one showing up emotionally, clarifying intentions, protecting privacy, and absorbing public interpretation. While Aaron benefited from being undefined. That undefined space, she realized, wasn't neutral. It was advantageous. Insiders say this is where the shift happened for her. Tiana reportedly recognized that she was being held to a standard of transparency and accountability that he wasn't expected to meet. When she moved decisively, it was framed as impulsive. When she stayed quiet, it was framed as strategic. When he stayed quiet, it was framed as dignity. That double standard didn't erupt overnight, it revealed itself gradually, until she could no longer ignore it. According to those close to her, the betrayal wasn't about disloyalty in the traditional sense. It was about allowing imbalance to persist. Allowing her to carry narrative weight alone. Allowing her character to be debated while his remained insulated. And most painfully, allowing her to question herself while he never had to. Tiana has hinted that she tried to address this privately. Not confrontationally. Not emotionally. But directly. She has suggested that she raised concerns about how the relationship was being perceived and how that perception was affecting her. What she needed wasn't control, it was reciprocity. A sense that they were protecting each other equally, not selectively. According to insiders, that's where the misalignment became undeniable. Rather than moving toward shared clarity, the response she received reinforced distance. Not cruelty, detachment. And detachment, when someone is asking for mutual grounding, can feel like abandonment. It signals that the relationship is serving one person's needs more comfortably than the other's. This is where the word betrayal takes on a different meaning. It wasn't about breaking a promise, it was about never fully standing in one. Tiana has implied that she believed they were building something mutual, while Aaron was preserving optionality. That difference in posture doesn't always reveal itself early. Sometimes it only becomes visible when one person asks for alignment, and the other hesitates. Insiders say that hesitation was the moment everything crystallized. Tiana reportedly understood that asking for balance would require her to keep negotiating for something that should have been instinctive. And she has been clear about this. Love that requires you to explain why you deserve equal consideration is not love that will sustain you. Fans looking back now notice how often Tiana was the emotional translator in the relationship. How she filled in gaps. How she softened narratives. How she let ambiguity stand, because she believed privacy was being honored on both sides. In hindsight, that privacy didn't feel mutual, it felt selective. This phase of her revelation also touches on self-betrayal. Tiana has acknowledged that she ignored early discomfort, because she wanted the relationship to be real in the way she experienced it. She has spoken about how easy it is to rationalize imbalance when you care deeply, to tell yourself that patience equals maturity, that silence equals strength, that understanding equals love. But eventually, those justifications stop working. According to her, the betrayal wasn't complete until she realized she was betraying herself by staying. That realization, insiders say, was sobering. It reframed everything she had tolerated under the name of grace. It forced her to see that loyalty without reciprocity isn't virtue, it's erosion. And once she saw that, she couldn't unsee it. What's striking in this phase is how little anger appears in her telling. There's disappointment. There's clarity. There's resolve. But there isn't rage. That absence is telling. It suggests the decision to leave wasn't reactive, it was deliberate. She didn't walk away to punish him. She walked away to stop diminishing herself. This is also where the public narrative began to feel inadequate. The simple explanations, they grew apart, they wanted different things, no longer captured the truth. According to Tiana, the issue wasn't difference. It was inequality in responsibility. One person was expected to hold the emotional and reputational frame of the relationship. The other was free to remain undefined. And undefined, she learned, is a position of power. Insiders say Tiana's decision to leave was quiet, but absolute. No ultimatums. No public statements. No attempts to reclaim the story. She stepped back, because she recognized that staying would mean accepting a dynamic that asked her to be flexible while someone else stayed protected. Fans now understand why there was no messy fallout. When clarity replaces confusion, drama disappears. There's nothing left to argue about. The answer becomes obvious, even if it's painful. And according to Tiana, once she understood what was happening, there was no version of the relationship that aligned with her values anymore. This phase of her story doesn't accuse. It explains. It explains why love isn't enough when it isn't paired with mutual accountability. Why privacy can become a shield instead of a bond. Why silence can protect one person while isolating the other. And why walking away isn't always abandonment. Sometimes it's the first act of loyalty to yourself. As this chapter closes, one truth stands out sharply. Tiana didn't leave because she was hurt. She left because she understood the source of the hurt and refused to keep normalizing it. And once someone reaches that level of clarity, no promise, no affection, and no public perception is strong enough to pull them back into a dynamic that requires self-sacrifice as the price of staying. By the time Teyana Taylor reached the final phase of telling her truth, the story was no longer about Pierre at all. It was about what she reclaimed the moment she walked away. This wasn't a breakup that left her questioning herself. It was a separation that returned her to herself, and that distinction is what makes everything she revealed so unsettling. According to Tiana, once she removed herself from the relationship, the fog lifted almost immediately. Not because the pain disappeared, but because the confusion did. She no longer had to interpret silence, justify imbalance, or negotiate for emotional reciprocity. The quiet that once felt heavy suddenly felt clean. And that's when she understood something crucial. The relationship had been draining her clarity long before it broke her heart. Insiders say this is where the betrayal fully revealed itself. Not in a hidden act, but in the aftermath. In how quickly Tiana's nervous system settled once she stepped away. In how little she missed the emotional labor she'd been performing. In how obvious it became that she had been carrying something that was never meant to be one-sided. When relief outweighs grief, it tells you everything you need to know. Tiana has spoken about how difficult it was to accept that love alone cannot fix misalignment. She believed in patience, in communication, in growth. But what she came to realize is that patience without reciprocity becomes self-neglect. Communication without response becomes self-betrayal. And growth that only happens on one side isn't growth, it's erosion. This phase of her story is where she names the cost. She cost herself peace trying to preserve the relationship's image. She cost herself rest by overthinking dynamics that should have felt natural. She cost herself self-trust by repeatedly overriding her intuition in favor of appearing understanding. And once she tallied those costs honestly, staying no longer made sense. What's most striking is how little resentment she expresses. According to those close to her, Tiana doesn't speak about Aaron with bitterness. She speaks about the experience with precision. She doesn't need him to be wrong in order for her decision to be right. That's the kind of clarity that comes after deep internal alignment, not emotional victory. She has also acknowledged her own role in staying longer than she should have. Not as self-blame, but as accountability. She admits she wanted the relationship to be something it wasn't. She believed that mutual care existed even when mutual responsibility didn't. That belief wasn't foolish, it was hopeful. But hope, she learned, cannot substitute for evidence. Fans watching this phase unfold began to understand why her exit was so quiet. There was nothing left to say. When you leave from clarity instead of anger, you don't need closure from the other person. The closure happens internally. Tiana didn't need a final conversation, a public explanation, or an apology to move on. She already had the information she needed. This is also where the narrative around betrayal evolves. Betrayal, in Tiana's telling, wasn't about being wronged in a dramatic sense. It was about being left alone inside a partnership. About realizing that the person you thought was standing beside you was actually standing behind their own interests, quietly, comfortably, and without malice. And that realization, she says, is what finally broke her attachment. Insiders say this phase marked a turning point in how Tiana approaches relationships altogether. She no longer confuses emotional intensity with emotional availability. She no longer interprets silence as depth. She no longer believes that loyalty means self-sacrifice. And perhaps most importantly, she no longer waits for someone else to validate discomfort she already feels. That's what she reclaimed: trust in herself. The public may have framed her departure as sudden or cold, but from her perspective, it was overdue. It was the culmination of many small moments where something didn't sit right. Many quiet instincts she pushed aside. Many compromises she told herself were temporary. Leaving wasn't impulsive. It was inevitable once she stopped negotiating with reality. What makes this final phase so powerful is that it doesn't end in accusation. It ends in resolution. Tiana doesn't ask the audience to judge Aaron. She asks them to understand her choice. To see that betrayal isn't always loud, and self-respect isn't always dramatic. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away, without trying to convince anyone why. Because the truth is, once you see a dynamic clearly, you can't unsee it. And once you honor that clarity, you don't need anyone else's permission to leave. As this chapter closes, one message rings louder than anything else she said. She didn't leave because she stopped loving. She left because she started listening to herself, to her intuition, and to the reality in front of her. And that's the part people find most shocking. Not the betrayal. Not the ending. But the fact that when she finally chose herself, everything else fell into place. This wasn't a story about heartbreak. It was a story about liberation, and the quiet power of refusing to stay where you are no longer equally held. If you've stayed this long, then you already know this wasn't just another breakup story. It was a lesson in clarity, boundaries, and self-respect that most people don't recognize until it's too late. What Tiana shared wasn't meant to shock for entertainment. It was meant to explain what so many people experience, but struggle to name. And this story doesn't stop here. The most important parts won't show up in headlines or interviews. They'll show up in what Tiana does next, how she moves differently, and how she never has to explain herself again. Those are the moments people miss, and those are the moments that matter most. So don't tap out now. Like this video, so this conversation doesn't get buried under watered-down takes. Subscribe so you'll hear when the next layer surfaces, because it won't come loudly, it'll come through actions and silence. And comment, because these stories aren't shaped by rumors, they're shaped by people who recognize patterns when they see them. This wasn't about choosing sides. It was about choosing clarity over comfort. And once you understand that difference, you'll never watch stories like this the same way again.